Zhang Ailing's Little Reunion Text Chapter 5. Just when he thought the trouble was over, he came again. She didn't ask why she hadn't been here these days. Later, he said once. At that time, I thought it was really impossible, and I had to forget it. She smiled as if she was a little surprised. Another time he said, I figured if you were really stupid, that would be the end of it. He had said more than once before, I think it's difficult for you. He meant that it was difficult for her to find someone who liked her. Julie smiled and said, I know, but the fact is that she wants him to leave. She once told Bibi in Hong Kong, I'm afraid of the future. He didn't say what he was afraid of, but Bibi knew it. He smiled a little sadly and said, You have to live your life. Jiyoung smiled and said, I can't help but tell others about you. That day I asked Su Heng, Do you think Miss Sheng is beautiful? It was a painter she had met at Xiang Jing's house. He said, He has a very good demeanor. I was very angry. She only smiled. The sea light searching the sea found her, and the blue light molded her into a temporary shrine. He gave her a few Japanese prints, sat next to her and read the album together, and after he finished reading, he held her hand to read. She suddenly noticed that the wrists in her peacock blue trumpet sleeves were very thin. Seeing that he was looking at her, she couldn't help but said defensively, Actually, I'm not usually this thin. He was stunned for a moment, then said, Is it for me? She blushed and lowered her head, and immediately remembered the click in the old novel, No matter what, I can't lift my head, it weighs 1,000 pounds. She couldn't lift her head either. Is it true or is she just acting? He looked at her for a moment and then kissed her. Two peacock blue sleeves slipped weakly onto his shoulders and wrapped around his neck. You seem to have a lot of experience. Julie smiled and said, It looks like it was in the movie. This time and thereafter, he only kissed on the lips like in the movie. He held her in his arms and sat on his knees, face to face, his eyes shining like diamond earrings next to her cheeks. Your eyes are so pretty. Triangle eyes. I don't know who said that to him. She thought he was a classmate or a colleague from his days as a teacher. In the silence, I heard pop songs playing on the radio elsewhere. At this time, they both laughed when they heard those Langamei tunes. It's not on high-rise buildings. It's on the streets below. But even the formulas in the lyrics have meaning. Occasionally, there are two clear sentences. Hey, this pop song is also very good. He was also listening. Most of them couldn't hear clearly, but to her it sounded like an English song that her second and third aunts often played and sang when she was a child, rafting down the river, the golden river of dreams, singing love song. She felt that she had never been so peaceful after childhood. Time has become long and endless, like a golden desert, vast and empty, with only bright music. The past and future have opened many doors, and eternal life can only be like this. This period of time is unlike anything else in life, and therefore has nothing to do with anything else. She just walked with him a little longer, boating on the river of golden dreams. You can go ashore at any time. He looked at her. She's obviously beautiful. How can I say she's not beautiful? He then said, You just can't smile well. You're fine now. But it's a more natural smile, she thought. He is 39 years old. Generally at this age, there is a kind of laziness, he said with a smile. Listening to his tone, he was also afraid of difficulties, but of course he meant that unlike others, he had the determination to start over. She also knew that there was no such thing as eternity, and her golden eternity was not like that. He calculated the age difference between Lu Shen and Zhu Guangping. They have only been together for 9 years. It seems too little. He added, however, Zhu Guangping was his student, and Lu Shen still regarded her as a young man worthy of love and care. He was always analyzing their relationship. Let's talk about Wang Jingwei and Chen Bijin again. When they were still comrades of the Kuomintang, Chen Bijin came to see him one night because he had something to do. He stood outside his house in the rain all night. He opened the door and invited her in the next morning. She had seen photos of Chen Bijin. He was short, fat, wearing glasses, and very ugly. She knew Wang Jingwei was a handsome man. We are half and half. There is no need to pursue each other. Seeing her smiling and saying nothing, he added, I took about 6 steps and you took 4 steps. As if bargaining, She smiled even more. Another time he said, "It's so bold that most men will be scared." "It's because I just expressed my feelings for you. We have no future at all. We are not going anywhere." But she could never think of words at the time. And even if she could argue, it seemed like she said it at the wrong time. Of course he would know later, not long after. How much time can we have? She traced his eyes, nose, and mouth with her fingertips. It was still half of Yao's profile when he was sitting, with his eyes looking down, and his concentrated smile, but there was a trace of sadness. "I'm always so happy, like ecstatic. And you're kind of sad," she said. He laughed and said, "I was like a child who cried for an apple for a long time and still sobbing when I got the apple in my hand." She knew he meant he'd always wanted to meet someone like her. "You look like a Buddha statue from the 6 dynasties, she said. "Hey, I also like those Buddha statues with thin waists. I don't know since when. All of them are Maitreya Buddha with a big belly. Those stone Buddhas are from the northern dynasties." He said that his ancestors were Qiang people. Zhu Nan said she had never seen me act like this. Zhu Nan is his niece. My niece has been following me and taking care of my house. She is very kind to me, seeing that my life is not stable. In order to help me maintain the family income, she decided to marry a timber merchant named Wen, who is also from our hometown. He is a very nice person. Julie visited him once at his residence in Shanghai. She saw Zhu Nan, who had a pretty and fair square face, slightly curly long hair hanging on his back, and was wearing a blue cloth burqa. He looked to be in his 20s at most. Mr. Wen happened to be there too. He bowed sideways, as if he was embarrassed. He was wearing a suit and was in his 30s. His face was a little numb and swollen, and he really wasn't worthy of her. She loves her uncle, Julie thought to herself. He said that he wrote a letter to a friend. "Miss Shang, Julie and I are in love." After a pause, he said a little protestingly at the end. She didn't say anything, but she was very happy. She also wanted people to know. And this is propaganda. Her legs were not thin, and the exposed top of her socks was wider. He caressed the leg. "Such a good person allows me to be so close to him." Fingers of palm leaves in the breeze. The tide on the beach is a winding white line that climbs up and then recedes, almost motionless. She wanted it to go on forever, to let her immerse herself in this golden eternity for a while longer. One day, she was sitting on him like this again, and suddenly something whipped her under the seat. She couldn't believe it, the lion and tiger dusting the tails of flies, batons wrapped in velvet. It's not in the 2 pornographic books I've read, and it can't be connected at the moment. You should immediately jump up with a smile and ignore it. But before he thought of this move, he stopped fighting. She didn't slip off his lap right away. That was too obvious. Later that day she told him, "Xiang Jing wrote me a letter, scolding you and telling me to be careful of you," she said with a smile. Jiang paused for a moment and then said, "Xiang Jing is a pretty good person. He also knows me very well. He said it's not easy for a person with no money like me to still be able to do something. He said he can't do it anymore." He doesn't believe her. She couldn't believe it. What motive did she have to say bad things about Xiang Jing to him? Or does it mean that someone cares about her and elevates her own status? She didn't think it through at all, but she also vaguely realized that Jiang was superstitious about his ability to influence people and didn't believe anyone would betray him. He is possessive of all his friends and refuses to give up any of them. The letter was in the desk drawer. It first praised her little masterpiece and then told her to be careful about, "There is a man-eating devil in this society." Of course, she didn't mention him by name, but Wenji was already saying, "Everyone is eating people outside now," said you are very close to Xiao Jiang. She didn't show it to him. She was most afraid of embarrassing anyone, let alone him. Although she was overly concerned. Maybe she was a little crazy at this point too and not wanting to face him. As a result, she asked Judah to help her write it and replied to Xiang Jing with a polite but irrelevant letter. Jiang returned to Nanjing and wrote that he continued to see friends, play chess, and walk on Qingliang Mountain, but everything was wrong. Life is like a leaping fish in your hands, and you want to catch it again and again. It smells fishy. She doesn't like this metaphor very much, Maybe she vaguely associates it with the tiger's tail that chases away flies. But his long letter was well written, and she showed it to Chuda to avoid thinking that they had something. Chuda smiled and said, "You should have a love letter too. I really like traffic lights," she said to Bibi as they crossed the street. "Take it back and put it in your hair," Bibi said. When Jiang came to Shanghai again, she told him, "I like Shanghai. Sometimes the roadside is so clean that you can sit down at any time." Jiang smiled and said, "Well, actually, that's not the case." "Why not?" When he said, "Some tall houses give people a sense of threat." "Isn't that also subjective? You don't give people an inferiority complex," he once said. He rang the bell and she opened the door. He smiled and said, "Every time I come in, I always feel like there is someone inside the door." From his tone, it seemed as if there was a female body attached to the back of the door, and even the door softened. She didn't much like to think that. "You have a very nice arrangement here," he said. "I've been to many elegant places, but none compared to this." She smiled and said, "These are all my mother and third aunt. They have nothing to do with me." He was slightly surprised and said, "What kind do you like?" "Deep purple cave," she thought. She liked any strong color, but she had never seen a dark purple wall unless it was a ballroom. If you want a color without memories, memories are always a bit sad. She only smiled and said softly, "It's different from other places." He seemed a little worried and didn't ask further. She felt it, and she felt a little disgusted. She subconsciously thought, "Are you ready to find a house?" He said that he still missed his first wife who died in the countryside the most. They had an old-style marriage and only had one blind date. "I don't like falling in love. I like getting married. I want to make sure," he said, burying his face in her shoulder. She doesn't understand. How can we get married without divorce? She didn't want to mention divorce to him, and she couldn't do it without money. At the same time, his words were a bit harsh. Maybe she also felt that his so-called marriage was another matter. After telling her twice, she had no response. One day, young Bayan said, "Let's let nature take its course, okay?" Hey, she was sure she could stop at any time. This time he left and would not come again. They hugged on the sofa, and a carved wooden bird stood on the door frame. The two yellow-brown doors that are facing each other are flush with the wall, and there is no lintel on them. How can there be any open space for a bird about a foot tall to stand? But even with her back to the door, she knew that it was three-dimensional, not flat, painted on the wall. The carving is very primitive and no paint is added. Is it an idol worshipped by distant ancestors? It was watching her. She could stand up and walk away at any time. More than 10 years later, when she was in New York, she made an exception and took a shower in the afternoon. While waiting for the abortionist to come, take a shower first. Just like some Western housewives who clean up before the maid comes to work. "I'm so anxious. It's already been for months." She read in a novel that it was said that it was too dangerous to fight after 3 months. It was so easy to find this person, but he was actually willing. "During pregnancy, my breasts were fuller and even flattened out when I lay down in the bathtub. It was like a pale female corpse that had lost blood, floating in the water. Women always put their lives on the line." She put on a black pullover vest and light brown twill narrow ankle boots. RUD only likes her to wear long hakama and country clothes. It couldn't be buttoned anymore and a button had been moved, but Bibi said she couldn't tell. "It's okay to have a little shang," RUD said, a little hesitantly at first. Julie smiled and said, "I don't want it, even under the best circumstances. I don't want it. I have money and a reliable person to guide me." The doorbell rang and she went to open the door. The apartment was rented out during the summer, and the owner went on vacation. The place was quite large. A short, round-headed man in his 30s with a straight face, pale, dark brown hair, dressed very neatly, carrying a briefcase, like an insurance broker, came in with a guarded look. "There's no one here," she said. That was one of his conditions. RUD escaped. She led him into the bedroom and examined him on the bed. He took off his shirt, wearing a short-sleeved shirt, and took out many utensils and washed his hands and disinfected them. It turned out to be a medicinal line. "Siput chow is also my mother's medicinal thread." He died in a foreign land, but died on the medicine line of a midwife in Shanghai in the early Republic of China. The overlap of time and space, far and near, is too funny. What if I can't fight it off? She asked anxiously. Would you rather I cut you? He said. She remained silent. I have always heard the word uterine scraping and always thought it was a minimal operation. Hearing what he said was like cutting it into 8 pieces. She also felt that he was threatening, but these things were really fuzzy to her. Before he left, she said, I'm just afraid that I won't be able to get down, and I'll be stuck there. It's been for months. No, but he was obviously thinking about it in his mind. Anyway, if you are worried, you can call. He gave him a phone number so that if he had any questions afterwards, he could call Masha, who worked in one of the largest department stores. Julie thought that Masha might not have her real name, and she might not be waiting for a call at home. He's gone. After a while, Aryuda came back and went to open the cupboard and put a firewood axe back in its place. There is a fireplace in this room, which is heated in winter. The fire is purely for mood. I didn't go out, he said. I was at the top of the stairs. I heard the elevator coming up and saw him go in. I just went to see what they had here. And when I saw this axe, I took it, thinking if you had something, I'll kill the son of a bitch. She didn't feel surprised when she heard this, based on his body. He is also credible. It turns out that he may be related to her teenage movie fan days, and he also spent many years in Hollywood. I've always been cheap, he said. I can't save any money either. The house I bought while playing poker and talking and laughing was sold inexplicably. He himself sneered. What's funny is that people say, RUD is good at money. He was always pushed to write about money in story meetings. I'm a coward, he said. They are not too far from the period setting of westerns, and sometimes fight at every turn. We have the damnedest thing for each other. It's weird that we are so good, he said with a puzzled and embarrassed smile. She didn't regret seeing each other too late. He is old, but he may not have liked her in the past few years, let alone for a long time. I've always been hit and run, he said. She could feel a thread trailing down her leg, like a bomb lead. After a few hours, the attack didn't happen, so I called Masha. The female clerk sounded like a fat Jewish woman in her 30s, and she obviously just wanted to comfort her, hold her hand. She didn't say anything. Call. For dinner, he went to the roast chicken shop across the street and bought a chicken. She was suffering from stomachache, so he let her eat it, and he ate it with relish. She couldn't help but feel a little disgusted, but did she want him to hold her hand? At night, she saw the male fetus in the toilet bowl under the bathroom light. In her horrified eyes, it was 10 inches long, standing upright on the white porcelain wall and in the water. A light layer of blood was smeared on the muscles, becoming a newly shaved fetus. Light orange color of wood. The blood condensed in the recesses outlines its outline, with clear lines. A pair of eyes that are disproportionately large, protruding, and with its wings folded. It is the wood-carved bird that once stood on the door. In a moment of extreme horror, she pulled the button. I thought I couldn't make it down, but I disappeared in the rough waves. Babi asked about the incident and said, "Did you capture anything?" He told her that he still didn't believe it, and always suspected that it was just imagination, and that he had spent $400 in vain. We really walked in with our eyes open, and we were never crazy, Jiang said. Maybe he also felt that there was something above the door watching them. I have something to do tomorrow, so I won't be able to come, he said. She took advantage of the weekend to see Babi. Babi transferred to her sister's university. Both sisters were very popular, but the discrimination against Indians in Shanghai was deeper than in Hong Kong because there was no connection with the British Empire. Most of the local Indians are of different religions and do not intermarry. Those of the same religion would rather go back to their hometown to marry a wife, because they think the girls here are bad and not conservative enough. The British and Americans went to concentration camps again. There are large photos of 2 Muslim monarchs hanging in the living room of their home. After the Shah of Iran divorced his Egyptian concubine over the issue of heirs, a photo of the Shah of Iran was added, and it seemed that he was regarded as a candidate for a husband. Bibi once explained to Julie that according to their standards, King Farouk was not fat. Of course, at that time, he was not as fat as he would later be. Queen Nariman, whom Farouk later married, was also a commoner, the daughter of a shopkeeper in Cairo. But after all, she was close to water and not as isolated as Shanghai during the war. Julie felt strange in her heart, but the world of Islam was originally mysterious. There was a goat tied up in the small patio at the back door of their house, and they were going to slaughter it and cut its throat in preparation for the festival. It was as big as a pony, with dark and damp curly hair like a green sheep. It stretched its head to eat the vegetables from the basket in the kitchen window. I happened to have nowhere to go that day, and it was really hard not to watch a movie. Julie suddenly remembered that the painter Zhu Heng had written her his address and told her to see his paintings at any time. She asked Bibi if she was interested, so they went to Zhu's house to see the paintings together. The Zhu family lived not far away, in a lane house. Enter through the back door of the kitchen. In the large and dark living room, there were more than a dozen unframed oil paintings, hanging on the wall, resting on the ground and leaning against the wall. Zhu Heng led them around in a very reserved manner. He was only in his 30s, but Jia Chang was wearing an all-dark green suit, as if he was a kind of aestheticist from the past, and the stained areas were even greener. Jiang suddenly walked in. Julie knew that he was very familiar with Zhu Heng, but she never thought that he happened to be here. He met Bibi once at her home. Everyone nodded and greeted her. The room was dimly lit. She only caught a glimpse of his smiling face by chance, but with embarrassment. Bibi's Chinese is not good enough to talk about painting, and she can only speak English. Julie thought the embarrassment was due to a language barrier and was afraid that he and Zhu Heng would have an inferiority complex. So she jumped into the gap without hesitation and kept talking, especially because he didn't like Zhu's paintings. He was even more embarrassed to leave after looking at them. After inspecting them twice, he took out 2 more pictures from the inner room. They probably only live in the 2 rooms on the ground floor. After admiring it, they laughed. The host and Young sent them out. There was a mahjong table in the small hall leading to the kitchen. They didn't even have time to take a closer look when they came in and out. They seemed to be all ladies. When Young came the next day, he found out that his wife was playing cards there. "You talk so much, you can't stop talking," he said with a smile. She just smiled and said, "That's terrible." Looking back, she remembered that the woman sitting in front of her had an angry look on her face. Walking by in a hurry, I saw that he seemed very tall and not very old. She said, "Am I not as good as her?" He said, "My wife said she is beautiful." Julie had seen a small photo of her taken outdoors. She was indeed a beauty by any standard. She had a rectangular face, slender and curvy, and she looked very charming. Here, standing in front of a banana tree, with a sullen face and a pair of eyebrows drawn in a parabola, she is the singer of Chinhuayu River. He said to himself, "I want to marry a beautiful woman this time." She was only 15 years old when she married him, but they only had feelings for each other. After being together for a few months before they had a physical relationship, he talked about when he was released from prison. "After I came out this time, I fell in love with her even more, but she became cold towards me." He laughed and said, "It's like she wants to make terms with me. I'm very not happy." Yesterday, he was slapped on the spot. Of course, he didn't mention it. He only said, if it were someone else, she would only get closer if she made such a fuss. We would still be the same. Julie chose yesterday to wear a long vest sewn from a large maroon scarf from the early Republic of China. The original wool threads hung down from the hem, covering the peacock blue cotton robe, which was very eye-catching. He clearly had a bad impression of her, and it was embarrassing to him. She couldn't help but feel disappointed. They should have ended it long ago, but of course, he can't just let his wife make a fuss and leave it alone. It's too ridiculous. Julie was completely calm with her and had nothing to apologize to her for. Nothing was taken from her because their relationship was different. He still sat until very late before leaving. When he came back the next day, she brought tea and sat on the carpet next to his sofa chair. He was a little surprised and said, "You are actually very gentle." Like a Japanese woman, maybe you were originally a Yanchai, but you have been sublimated. She always smiled as if she was used to flattery. When I left yesterday, the doorman here was too late and had to hold the key to open the door for me, swearing. I got angry and hit him. He raised his head and took a drag of his cigarette. There was an air of contempt in it. Oh, he was beaten hard. He fell a long way. Such a big guy is useless because I practice Tai Chi. In fact, I often give them money, especially the one who drives the elevator. The two doormen at the apartment were both big men from Shandong, who had retired from some unknown army. They wore yellow khaki uniforms and wore British-style shorts in the summer. They were lying on a rattan lounge chair blocking the road, with two yellow knees sticking out. The elevator driver told Chude, "That gentleman is not big, but he is not very strong. He beat the doorman until his face was bruised. He is too embarrassed to come to work these 2 days." For some reason, since Jiang beat the guard, Julie felt that she treated him differently, and now there was no longer any element of imagination. I fell in love with Mr. Xiao, and he wanted to find a way to get a divorce, she actually told Babi, speaking briskly while one of their hands was hanging on the leather strap of the bus above their heads, not giving her a chance to get angry. Bibi also continued to smile, but it was her kind of smile that showed a third of fear. Later, he said angrily, "The first person to break through your defense. You have no female instinct at all." Then he smiled and said, "I wish I were a man. I would save you so much trouble." When I met Jiang at Julie's place, of course she was still talking and laughing in a perfunctory manner. He found her very charming. Julie's hair is separated at the end and can be torn into pieces, he suddenly told her. Julie was very embarrassed. He was showing off their intimacy. Bibi obviously felt that these words were too ungentlemanly, and his expression changed. But then he changed his mind. He walked with Bibi that day. One day, Julie told him that she was notorious for needing money and was competing for royalties. "I always want to make more money, and the debt I owe my mother must be repaid." She had also mentioned that her mother had done something for her before, spend a lot of money and complain. But this time he was extremely embarrassed as soon as he said it, because his wife was a singer, and of course he had paid for her to pay off her debts. It must have sounded familiar to him, like the axes out in social novels. But at this moment, knowing that he had no money now, she told him that it was just because her attitude towards money needed to be explained. Lian Jiang's expression changed a little, but then he smiled and said, "HMM." He went back to Nanjing again. When she came to Shanghai again in early summer, a suitcase came to her. She thought it came directly from the station. It was probably not convenient to say in the letter that he only told her. After he came that he was going to central China to apply for a newspaper. Then he smiled and dragged the cheap medium-sized cloth grain plywood suitcase over, flattened it and opened the lid, revealing a box of banknotes. She knew that the funds for running the newspaper must come from him. But without looking at it, she closed the lid of the box with a smile, pulled it open and stood in the corner of the room. After changing several currency systems and adding inflation, she had no idea of the value of the currency. But she also knew that despite inflation, it was a large amount of money. She carried the box to Chu-Di and said with a smile, "Xiao Ziyang brought it to me to pay back the second aunt's money." In fact, he didn't say that, but she didn't expect it at this time. Chuda smiled and said, "He is good at making money." Only then did Julie feel that she had an excuse. She didn't have to be embarrassed, and she could let him have dinner. But the next night after he had dinner at their house, she felt really embarrassed and brought a handkerchief. As soon as she handed it to him, she turned away and turned around to smile. He looked at her with fascination. But when she returned to the guest room, Jiang smiled and said, "How can you wipe your face if this towel is so dry and hot?" The small square towel meant for after-dinner use was originally folded into a triangle and placed on the plate like to sandwiches, cold and wet. She guessed that he was used to heating the handles of hand towels. They felt comfortable when they were hot and the pores opened, so she took them and twisted them again. She used Chu-Di's bathroom, which was at the other end of the corridor, and brought it all away. The towel was small and must have been cold, so she turned the hot water tap very Hot and twisted it very tightly, which made her hands hurt. I'll go twist it again. When she came back, he said, how about going to the balcony? This balcony is not small, but it is square, and there is no furniture at all. The thick and wide cement railings are built very high, and the whole structure is geometric. There is no night scene in the city where lights are turned off. On the dark balcony is the sky above. In the empty purple sky with a rusty smell, most of the white moon hangs high, wrapped in a ball of clear light. Ming is like the moon. When can I catch it? It's here. He grabbed her with a gesture, and both of them laughed. He forgot the cigarette between his fingers and noticed that he had burned her arm, and chuckled and said ooh. He kissed her, and she was like the flame on a candle, blown back by a gust of wind and turned upside down. But the hot air was also the flame of a candle, burning hot against it. Is it true? She said. It's true. Both of them are true. He comes almost every day. This afternoon Yunnan came to see him. Julie greeted him and immediately walked away, letting them talk. When she made tea, Yunnan left without eating. They stood on the balcony on the highest floor to watch her come out. She turned away from the street and smiled and waved. She said, "You are like in heaven," he told Julie the next day. Because she loves him, Julie thought to herself, a little sadly. During the Buddha bathing festival temple fair, several nearby streets were filled with stalls. Even the buzzing of people could be heard from high-rise buildings, and there was an air of early summer. Julie went down and bought 2 flat gold-embroidered shoe uppers, but there was nothing here. It has an earthy flavor, unlike Hong Kong's homespun cloth. "You're dressed like a country boy," he said. As she snuggled closer, she missed the sight of him sitting far away, and suddenly said, "I seem to only like a certain angle of you." Jiyoung's face moved, because sometimes she suddenly lost interest. But then there was a look of contempt in his eyes. He leaned over and put out the cigarette. He smiled and said, "You love me very much, and I know it very well." He turned around and kissed her, like the shadow of the mountain covering the dark sky. He came down, with a lock of hair hanging in front of his forehead. He spoke a few words, and then absent-mindedly turned his head to kiss her, looking like a little animal by the stream, sometimes lowering his head to sip water. The brick-red curtains were caught by the wind on the golden horizontal iron bars, and each edge was like a full red sail. A large round mirror on the wall looks like a moon cave door. The setting sun cast a small colorful rainbow shadows on the mirror. They looked at it silently, almost with fear. He laughed and said, "No one is together like this all day long." He added, "I never get tired of seeing each other, but Jingding Mountain is the only one. It would be nice to be able to sleep like this for a whole night." "Just holding her," he said. He added, "There is a kind of muntjac in the countryside. It is a very big deer with a small head. One day I caught one. It was so strong that I almost ran away from it. I was so tired that I fell asleep holding it in my arms. When I woke up, it had already run away." The rainbow shadow disappeared. They lay side by side on the sofa, and he looked into her eyes for a long time in the dusk. "Suddenly I feel like you look like a fox girl from a fairy tale." He told her that his first wife died of tuberculosis because she missed him, and was obsessed with a vixen. She thought she dreamed of him every day. He really believes in vixens. Julie suddenly felt that the entire Central Plains was separated between them, so far away that it made her heart palpitate. The wooden bird still stands on the door. He went back to Nanjing. She wrote to him, "I am so glad to have your wife there." She remembered what Babi said about needing to find a prostitute after going out with her girlfriend. It wasn't that she was insulting. They were still a couple now anyway. She knew that Young would never let Fei Wen go without a huge amount of alimony. She didn't think he had anything to feel sorry for Fei Wen. So beautiful, and just over 20 years old. Are you still afraid that there is no way out? She does not envy those who were or will be in the past. In the same letter she added, "I'm still worried about what will happen to us in the future." He wrote back, "As for our marriage, it is indeed troublesome. But let me bear all the unpleasant things." Last night she got up and opened the cupboard in the dining room to pour wine. I went to grab it, and he laughed strangely and said, "My father." Julie was horrified when she saw it, and never asked the meaning of that sentence. It must have always been since the age of 15 that he had replaced her late father in her mind. So now she had to tell her father. Now everyone knows that Chang Julie is from Shaojiang, he wrote. Julin must have heard something about it and came over. His eyes were wide open in surprise. But it looks like everything is business as usual here. Let's see if there's any juice coming out. Since he was 5 years old, his father went to talk about Xiang. As a result, he was sent to a high school affiliated with a university. He studied for 2 years and was promoted to university. After 2 years of studying, he did not want to continue and wanted to find a job. Julie was not interested and did not agree to continue reading. But she could not help him find trouble. And she was not willing to speak to Jiang. You can't rely on help alone, Chuda said in front of him. Julie was slightly disgusted by these words because her brother was born to be a freeloader. How could it be okay if no one helped him, at least in the beginning? He was seriously ill once when he was a child. Chuda stayed up late for days and counted a few drops of medicine for him every 2 hours. Julie also listened to what she said. But over the years, she had become accustomed to hardening her heart and defending herself. Otherwise, everyone would come to her. Julie wrote a letter to Young saying that she dreamed of telling her old maid about him. And at the same time, she saw his smiling face in the bright sun. She didn't know why it was a deep red face, and it was engraved with swastikas about an inch square. The relief is 2 to 3 points deep with clear shadows. She wondered why she hadn't noticed it until now, so she touched it gently with her fingertips, wondering if it still hurt a little. He said in the letter that he didn't know why the swastika was engraved on it. In fact, she knew a little bit that it was a symbol of exile, and the swastika represented the Axis powers. She wrote a poem, There is no me in his past. The passing years of silence, deep courtyard, basking in the sun in an empty room. It is already the ancient sun. I want to keep running in, shouting I'm here. I'm here. He didn't say it, but he obviously didn't like it. His past was vivid and colorful, not so empty, waiting for her to come.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.